So I know that Elizabeth said that they asked me to do a talk on collaboration, and in fact I am going to. But I think I'm going to look at collaboration perhaps just a little bit differently, because collaboration we tend to think of as kind of the purview of the sector and something that we intentionally do in order to create a project. And I would like to say that the ideas that I'm putting forward are very much about human relationships, and any time we are working with each other in order to make the world a better place, I think these things apply. So I'm not just going to talk about formalized collaboration. I'm not going to talk about partnership agreements and the kind of formalized things that we need to do in the sector. Instead, I'm going to talk about the very, very human piece of collaboration, because honestly, I think that that underpins everything else. So I'd like to start by telling you a little story. And this story actually comes out of West Africa. How many people have heard of the Anansi stories? A few? Sprinkling of people? Okay, so Anansi one day decided that he wanted to make the world a better place. And he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and he said, well, I could make the world a better place only if I have all the wisdom in the world. That's the only way that I can do this. So he went to the sun god, and he asked the sun god about whether he could be the keeper of all the wisdom. And the sun god thought for a minute and then realized he needed somebody to keep all the wisdom. So he gave him a big pot full of all the wisdom in the world. And then Anansi left, taking the pot with him, and he was really, really happy because he had all the wisdom in the world. He was going to do great things, but the more he walked, the more he started to get suspicious. The more he thought, wait a minute, if I have all the wisdom, somebody else is going to try and get this wisdom from me. I'd better hide it really well. So he looked for the tallest tree he could possibly find, and he strapped that big pot of wisdom to the front of him, and he started to climb the tree. It was pretty tough going. Got a big pot of wisdom in front of you. It's pretty hard to climb a tree. But he's climbing, climbing, climbing. He's about halfway up, and he's taking a break, and then his daughter calls down from below, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, shh, don't tell anyone. I'm trying to take this wisdom to the top of the tree so no one can get it." And she said, "Well, wouldn't it be easier if you strapped the wisdom to your back instead of to your front?" Took the wisdom, shifted it around with great difficulty, and began to climb, and it was way easier, and he was really happy, and he was really excited, and then he thought, wait a minute, how come if I'm carrying all the wisdom, my daughter was wise enough to know that I wasn't carrying it right? There must be a leak in this big pot of wisdom. So he put the wisdom down on a branch, and he started thinking, and he thought, the sun god has tricked me. And he got madder and madder and madder, and he got so mad that he kicked the big pot of wisdom. And the wisdom went everywhere. It went north, it went south, it went east, and it went west, and people kept picking up the pieces of wisdom and putting them in their pockets. And some people picked up a lot of wisdom, and some people picked up a little bit of wisdom, but everybody picked up some of the wisdom. And so Anansi to this day is going around talking to everybody, trying to get back those pieces of wisdom. I tell that story. I love that story. Thank you. I love that story because that's why I believe in collaboration. I believe that everyone holds part of the wisdom, and in these difficult times, in our complex environments, it is really, really critical that nobody believes that they hold all the wisdom. One person does not hold all the wisdom, and collectively, we can come up with some tremendous things, which is certainly what we've experienced in Kingston, Galloway, Orton Park. Now, the idea of collaboration and working collectively is not new. Beings have been doing that since time began. Aristotle talks about how it's impossible in the human condition to be so self-sufficient that we don't need anyone else. Darwin may have talked about the survival of the fittest, but he goes on to say that those who survive are those who adapt and those who collaborate. So as I move on, it's all human dynamics that I'm really talking about when we talk about collaboration, and hopefully that we can use this in our formalized work as well as our more loose networks, and anytime we're trying to make the world a better place. I'm offering you today 5 good ideas, but not 5 good individual ideas. I believe strongly that we do work in complexity, and one good idea, just like one piece of wisdom, is not going to do it. So the 5 ideas that I am offering today are 5 good interconnected ideas on working together. So my first good idea may seem completely counterintuitive to collaboration, but the first thing I'd like to talk about is autonomy. I read an article a little while ago where they said, and I can't remember who wrote the article, but they said, it's time for us all to abandon our individual agendas and take on a collective agenda. Well, I don't know the people that this person was talking to, but the people that I know are not ready to abandon their own agendas. Nor should they, because the piece of wisdom that people hold is the wisdom that leads them to do the piece of the work that is right for them. And that could be as an individual, and it could be as an organization. The whole idea of working together is not that we all think the same and do the same. In fact, that's what is the brilliant part about collaboration, is that we don't all think the same. And the ones that I've seen that really struggle is where everybody comes together and says, well, what you really do in your work life under your own mandate, that doesn't matter here. What matters is what we've decided to do together. And it does matter. It does matter that everybody is trying to achieve the piece of the goal that is theirs. Autonomy, according to Webster's dictionary, is the right to self-governance. And that's quite a bit different from independence. Because governance, self-governance is always in context. Countries, municipalities, organizations have governance structures. Those are not isolated governance structures. They are within the context of the social contract in which we work. And I think that that's really important to understand when we're working with other people, is that we need to come to agreement. We need to decide what it is that we collectively believe and we're collectively trying to attain. And then honor the self-governance of each of the players within that social contract. That way, everybody is bringing their own assets to the table and their own wisdom and diverse perspective in order to create something that is greater than the sum of the whole that is greater than the sum of the parts, sorry. My brother used to say, that there's nothing worse than designing a flyer by committee. Yeah, I see a lot of eye rolling. Yeah, you've all been there. The idea isn't that it's always better to do everything together. The idea is that everybody has their perspective, and their perspective is going to be really important for that flyer or not, right? Everybody doesn't have to have an opinion for the flyer, but the people who are really good at flyers, they should probably have an opinion about that flyer. A story from Scarborough that I'll tell you a little bit about autonomy. I know that Elizabeth gave you the introduction that talked about architects and planners and artists and property owners and all these folks. So a really good example would be our work in Community Design Initiative or Tower Neighborhood Renewal. These two initiatives, if you've read anything about them, kind of morph into one another. I often have a hard time separating them. But this initiative in East Scarborough brought together primarily local residents and a property owner. They were working together to improve the livability of 2 of the towers in the community. We had all kinds of other people at the table. We have artists, we have environmentalists, urban planners, city bureaucrats, artists and architects. Forgive me if I've forgotten anybody. They were not all there for the same reason. So the architects were not to abandon their agenda of creating beautiful spaces in the inner suburbs. It wasn't necessarily the same as the environmentalist agenda. It wasn't necessarily even the same as the residents' agenda. But it was part of the agenda that would move the initiative forward and bring something really, really of value. So if the residents' agenda were activities for young people, the resident-led design of the storefront court sports pad, which you may or may not have seen, it's on our website, actually fueled that goal in such a way that no one had envisioned to begin with. If we had worked and said, okay, what we want to do is create sports programming because they said sports, the dream of a new space and a new innovative space that would be shared by all the community never would have happened. So directly related to autonomy is the idea of empathy. So if everybody's got their own agenda, their own goals, their own assets, their own strengths, and their own intentions in coming to the project, in order for the collaboration to work, we all have to take the opportunity to try and understand those goals, strengths, assets, aspirations, and intentions. The collaborations that I work on, and I think we've got about 9 going at this point in time, all are really fueled by this idea that everybody is coming to the table with their own agenda, and that is respected, and that's the autonomy piece, but it's also understood that it's not a hidden agenda, it's something that we embrace and try to understand about one another. What do you bring to the table? And I know some people are pretty sick of me going around every time we start a meeting and saying, so why are you here? And it's not, the formalized approach, it's the real authentic. Why are you, human being, at this table today? Why did you choose to do this? And understanding those underpinnings are really, really important in order to work together. I have also been at lots of collaborations where we get down and we go right to action. We go right to, okay, what's the action agendas? What did we do last time? And we don't kind of check in with each other who we are as human beings. And I think that for collaborations to work, we need to remember that very human element of it. One of the really cool things I learned about empathy in the last little while, and in your resources on your table, you've got this very cool video, and I really encourage all of you to watch it. It's about 10 minutes long, on empathy, or outrospection, as they like to call it. But one of the really cool things that I've learned in the last few years about empathy is how it helps to mitigate the effects of imbalanced power dynamics. So one of the collaborations we have is with University of Toronto Scarborough. We've done a lot of reading and a lot of research, and in fact two of our professor colleagues wrote a paper on community university initiatives across Canada and the US. And what the analysis is that most community university partnerships work on one of 2 models. One is the charitable model. The community helps the poor the university helps the poor community, right? So the community's got resources, the university's got resources, the community doesn't. University gives resources to community. And the other one we lovingly like to call the Petri dish model. And that is where the university looks at people who are struggling and say, oh, look, there's a sociological experiment. Let's go study it. And when we started with University of Toronto, University of Toronto Scarborough, we actually had these conversations. The Petri dish model is a favorite one that we tend to bring back because this was a real living conversation that we had. And I think it was our ability as the community to not just say, oh, wait a minute, you're wrong, right? But to say, okay, you're a university. What is it that you as a university need to get out of this? Empathy, we tend to think about, we have to empathize with those weaker than us. What I learned recently about empathy is that it works really well when you try and empathize with those with power. It turns out what the university really wants is to be seen and to be relevant in the community. And they want really good learning experiences for their students. Those are the two things that they want. So everything we do with the university has those outcomes. We, as the community, have that to give the university. We're not a recipient of their largesse. We are equal players. We have something to offer them that they need. And out of that has come all kinds of wonderful things. We have Community in the University, which are a series of classes, environmental courses, taught by usually PhD students. And that's something that we have to offer them, is we know about teaching. Right? We do adult education. We know how to communicate with people in the community, and we teach that to them. And so they're gaining a skill that they actually don't learn in all the years that they're doing their PhD. Okay, so we've got autonomy and we've got empathy. But we also need purpose, right? And anything you ever read on collaboration will certainly talk to you about having a shared vision. Many of you may have heard the expression, it's one of my all-time favorites, vision without action is a daydream, but action without vision is a nightmare. Really important that we are moving towards something. We don't collaborate just for the sake of collaboration, although most of the things that I do, I focus on the collaboration and to make sure that all the human elements are taken care of as we move forward. But I don't want you to think that that means that it's not a strategic alliance. It is very strategic. A lot of those shared visions that we all have for whatever part of the sector we work in are big, they're overwhelming, they're complex, and there's changing landscapes. Recently, has anyone noticed like things keep just getting faster? Everything is moving so quickly, and our collaborations and our networks need to keep moving and changing to catch up. Really hard to continue to have a shared purpose when all this stuff is shifting, right? At Storefront, we work in an emergent framework. And what that we've come to distill down to mean is that emergence is where momentum meets opportunity. Momentum is generating all the time. New opportunities are arising all the time, and a brilliant collaboration knows itself, its constituents, and everybody associated with it well enough so that when that moment of emergence arises, we're nimble enough and reflective enough and strong enough to be able to take on that exciting new opportunity. So how do you do that? That's a very good question, and I will continue to say you partially do that by understanding yourselves as a collaborative and your individual players and their motivations and goals so that you are sensing that momentum at all times. And I'm just going to slide a little piece in here about my own personal bias for curated partnerships and curated collaborations. The Storefront calls itself a community backbone organization, which works similarly to the backbone organization you'll find in the collective impact literature. But we are really the organization that is mandated to pay attention to process, to the individual players at the table, to share communication across, between, and among players, which is why we can participate in so many collaborations. We're not necessarily leading. We're not necessarily the holders of the subject matter. We are the holders of the process. So some of the things that we do in order to keep people focused on their purpose is we engage in a lot of reflective practice. So what does reflective practice mean? It sounds a little esoteric. What it really means is, what are we seeing and what does that tell us? We've adopted the language more recently of signs and signals. But to stop and say, what are we seeing and what does that tell us? And do that regularly. Because one of the other things that I know a lot of collaborations tend to work really effectively as a collaboration, but put it in the context of the people that the collaboration is actually supposed to help, or in a landscape that has since shifted, then it actually ends up not accomplishing anything. So if you engage in regular reflective practice, what are we seeing and what does that tell us? You are constantly understanding and shifting your lovely little work plans and your goals and your strategies accordingly, which is also hard because you work really, really hard on those work plans. I was working on one before I came here today, as a matter of fact. And they're right. The work plan is absolutely right for today. And tomorrow, the work plan might be wrong, and you've got to be okay with that. Constantly talking about context. Again, I do this endlessly. Where have we been? Where are we now? Where are we going? Really simple conversations. But to understand where we have been, what is the founding story? Oh my goodness, really? Okay. Sorry, I was just giving the five-minute high sign. To understand really where we're going, we need to know where we've been, and we need to know where we are right now. And if we don't have those conversations and we don't think about that, purpose is a very difficult thing to hold on to. Celebration of small achievements. And when I say small achievements, the other thing about working in complexity is sometimes the achievements weren't on the work plan, right? It's the anticipated and unanticipated. So going back to the Tower neighborhood renewal, the whole thing was about sports, right? Things for kids to do after school, youth focused, the whole thing. But one of the key strategies was ensuring that the residents and the landlord had the kind of relationship where they could make decisions together, mitigating that power dynamic, using all the kinds of things I'm talking about. And one of the first successes for the tenants with the landlord was an accessibility ramp. They had one in one building and not the other. And that happened really, really quickly. We talk about that all the time, right? It wasn't about youth and it wasn't about sports, but it was about the residents really articulating to the landlord what it is that they needed, the residents understanding the complexity of what the landlord had to go through in order to get that, and coming together and having this lovely ramp. The fourth, oh boy, I better motor, enabling environments. So one of the resources there, I think it's called Changeology, talks about sticky solutions, and that goes back to empathy. Sticky solutions are creating environments where it's easy, not simple, but it's the easy solution. You don't want to be going back again to the designing flyer by committee, right? It's not probably the easiest way to design a flyer, and it's not the most effective way. So making the collaboration the way that everybody's going to most easily make their mandate, right? And it doesn't mean that it's not difficult. Collaboration's terribly difficult, but you're going to actually do better in the collaboration than you would by yourself. You need to create that sticky solution for everybody at the table. An example I will give you about that is we have a 15-year-old service delivery hub with 35 partners. It's a 15-year-old success. It has facilitated people getting services and programs in East Scarborough for the last 15 years. And the whole purpose of the Service Delivery Hub is to make it easier for the people delivering programs and services to do that. That's the purpose. We can talk about co-location, yep, that's a purpose. We can talk about outreach sites, yep, that's a purpose. But really, its design is just to make it easier for everybody at the table. And finally, I'd like to just say a word or two, which is not on my piece of paper. Where that went. Doesn't matter. About belonging. People join networks, collaborations, partnerships because of that sense of being part of something greater than themselves. It's really important to recognize that, to welcome people, to bring people in a way that says your contribution matters. And I'll give you a quick example actually from the Unitarian congregation that I belong to, and that is a committee completely designed to ask people, ask members, are you as connected as you want to be? It's another thing we do in the neighborhood. We run around the neighborhood. We say, are you as connected as you want to be? Going back to autonomy. Not, have you joined this thing? But are you as connected as you want to be? So in conclusion, 5 good ideas. I was out for lunch the other day. A friend of mine asked me, so what leadership training did you take? I said, I didn't take leadership training. I never went to any leadership school. And then I thought about it a few more minutes and said, yeah, well, maybe I did. My first career was in early childhood education. And quite honestly, that was the best training I could have got for leading collaborations. Those of you who know anything about early childhood education, one of the real philosophies and psychologies that is taught is by Erik Erikson, autonomy versus shame and doubt. It's what you teach a 2-year-old. Do we teach a 2-year-old that and then forget about it for the rest of our lives, or do we work in a framework of autonomy? Empathy, you all know that we teach children empathy in Mary Gordon's fabulous project, I always want to say the roots of youth empathy. It's the roots of empathy, has made an enormous difference in the way children interact with each other. The sense of purpose, have you ever heard a 3-year-old ask why? Again, do we stop wanting to know why? Why are we doing this? Where have we been? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's the success? The enabling environment was great, working in nursery schools and daycares, because you set up stations, right? You've got the art station and the science station. You've got the cars and trucks over here. You've got the sandbox over here. And everybody is autonomously going to what's really interesting to them. And so you've made learning really, really easy. It's a sticky solution. And I probably don't need to say too much about fun and belonging. Certainly that is one of the major roles of childhood, is to have fun and figure out where you belong in the world and what your sense of the world is. So one more thing before we go on to our questions. I did give you 5 resources. There are 5 excellent resources. I forgot one. That is called The Little Community That Could by Kathy Mann, and it's the story of the philosophies behind how we built the East Scarborough storefront and contains much of what I've talked about today.